It's strange. The smarter the world becomes, the dumber everything feels. Information is infinite, yet insight is vanishing. Experts multiply, but wisdom dissolves. You'd think more education, more data, and more intelligence would make society sharper, but instead it's making us easier to control. And that's not an accident, because intelligence today isn't being erased, it's being redirected, bent, rewired to serve systems that don't want independent thinkers. They want clever functionaries, people who mistake their ability to reason for freedom, while unknowingly using that reasoning to reinforce the very structures that exploit it. This is the quiet evolution of control, one that doesn't silence thought, but steers it. And it starts early. For decades, school has been the first factory of intellectual obedience. John Taylor Gatto, a teacher who won national awards for education, eventually quit the profession after realizing something disturbing. The system didn't exist to produce thinkers, but to train dependents. His claim was blunt. Schools were built to mirror industrial labor. Timed bells, standardized tests, hierarchies of authority. Students weren't learning how to think, they were learning how to comply. That model didn't fade, it scaled. We now produce intellectual workers optimized for systems, not truth. People taught to memorize, not question. To deliver clever answers, not dangerous questions. Because the moment intelligence becomes unpredictable, it stops being profitable. Modern institutions learned how to domesticate brilliance. In corporations, intelligence means efficiency. In media, it means persuasion. In politics, it means narrative control. In academia, it means loyalty to frameworks. Everywhere, the message is the same. You're free to think, as long as your thoughts remain useful. But here's where the shift gets darker. Intelligence used to be a tool of liberation, a way to escape manipulation. Now, it's the very mechanism used to enforce it. The best propaganda today doesn't silence debate, it overloads it. It buries truth under noise, forcing even the sharpest minds to pick a side before they've even asked a question. And social media perfected this weapon. The more intelligent someone is, the more rationalizations they can produce. The smarter the person, the better they are at defending illusions. You can see it everywhere. Political commentators spinning contradictions into logic, influencers turning ideology into critical thought, AI researchers arguing ethics through corporate PR. These aren't fools. They're brilliant people doing the intellectual labor of their own containment. Philosopher Michel Foucault called this power through knowledge. He warned that intelligence and authority aren't opposites. They're symbiotic. The system doesn't need to suppress knowledge when it can manufacture consent through it. Make people believe they're free because they can argue their position well, even if every position they can choose from was pre-selected. That's the new sophistication of control. The old dictatorships censored thought. The new ones curate it. They give you endless choices as long as every option leads back to the same machinery. And the irony is, the smarter you are, the more confidence you have in your own reasoning, the easier it is to trap you in a maze designed by someone else. Critical thinking today has become performative. It's a brand. People think in public, optimizing for applause instead of accuracy. The internet rewarded articulation over reflection. Whoever sounds smartest wins, even if they're completely wrong. Debates devolve into verbal gymnastics, not to find truth, but to dominate opponents. The outcome doesn't matter. The performance does. And performance is predictable. It's measurable, quantifiable, monetizable. The platforms want that. They need intelligence that generates engagement, not transformation. That's why the algorithm quietly promotes friction, outrage, and intellectual combat. Not wisdom, not depth, just activity. Because thinking deeply doesn't keep you scrolling, but conflict does. Even academia, the traditional home of intellectual rigor, hasn't escaped this trap. Funding, prestige, and tenure are tied to ideological conformity. A researcher who challenges accepted narratives risks being labeled unscientific or controversial. The result? Highly intelligent people producing sanitized thought, conformist innovation, safe rebellion. The system doesn't fear intelligence. It fears independence. And it's subtle. The line between genuine insight and performative intellect blurs until you can't tell if someone's thinking freely or just echoing smarter propaganda. Even the language of resistance gets commodified. Critical theory, rational debate, skepticism, all once revolutionary, now appear as hashtags, drained of meaning. Think about it. The smartest people in the world built the algorithms that exploit attention, the AI models that replace creativity, and the economic systems that ensure inequality. Intelligence didn't fail us. It served the system perfectly, because the incentives behind intelligence were hijacked long ago. Philosopher Hannah Arendt once wrote about the banality of evil, ordinary people following ordinary logic, committing atrocities not out of hatred but obedience. Today, that banality lives in a different form, intellectual evil, not violent but compliant. It's the well-spoken spokesperson defending mass surveillance, the data scientist building predictive policing models, the engineer optimizing addiction loops for children's apps. None of them think they're doing harm. They're just being smart. The scariest part isn't that intelligence is corrupted. It's that intelligence has been turned into moral camouflage. The smarter someone sounds, the more justified their actions appear. The same mind that could question reality now builds elegant defenses for why it shouldn't. And this isn't new. Throughout history, systems of power have relied on smart people who convinced themselves they were helping. The architects of propaganda in Nazi Germany were psychologists and linguists. The designers of the atomic bomb were theoretical geniuses. The algorithms guiding your feed today are coded by people who claim to protect democracy. Every era believes its intellect is moral. That's what makes it dangerous. The same intelligence that once freed humanity from superstition now enslaves it through complexity. We've replaced blind faith with blind rationality. Different tools, same submission. Because if you can rationalize everything, you can justify anything. And that's the core of the weaponization. Intelligence has become a shield. It protects people from self-doubt, from discomfort, from the pain of admitting they might be wrong. The more intelligent someone is, the more intricate their excuses become. Cognitive dissonance turns into an art form. Psychologist Daniel Kahneman described this perfectly. The brain's two modes of thought, fast and slow. Fast thinking reacts. Slow thinking analyzes. But in a world of perpetual stimuli, slow thinking doesn't stand a chance. The system knows this. That's why it bombards you. Speed disables skepticism. Every tweet, every reel, every headline pushes your mind into reflex mode. You might feel informed, but you're just reacting faster. And this speed gives birth to illusion, the illusion of intelligence. The sense that because you can explain, you understand. Because you can argue, you're awake. But real understanding requires stillness, reflection, silence. And that's the one state modern systems can't monetize. Philosopher Byung-Chul Han calls this the burnout society. We're not oppressed by censorship, but by overstimulation. We're too busy to think, too connected to reflect. The pressure to be productive replaces the space to be perceptive. Intelligence becomes transactional, a means to maintain status, productivity, identity. Even our emotional intelligence, once a path to empathy, gets turned into manipulation. Corporations use empathy training to soften criticism, not encourage compassion. Leaders use self-awareness language to appear human while serving profit. The language of enlightenment becomes a sales script. That's how deep the weaponization goes. It doesn't just hijack what you think, it rewires why you think. The question shifts from what is true to what works. Morality becomes efficiency. Wisdom becomes branding. Truth becomes irrelevant. But this isn't a conspiracy, it's a design. Because intelligence, like energy, follows incentives. It flows where it's rewarded. And right now, the rewards are perfectly aligned with control. Intelligent people who question the wrong things lose jobs, followers, access. Those who defend the system, even unconsciously, thrive. The result? A culture of smart obedience. The philosopher Slavoj Žižek once said that ideology works best when you think you're beyond it. That's the paradox. The moment you believe you're thinking freely, you're probably not. The system no longer needs to hide its influence. It just gives you enough options to feel like you made a choice. And maybe that's why modern life feels so mentally exhausting, because deep down, everyone senses it. The algorithms don't just recommend content, they recommend opinions. The institutions don't just inform, they instruct emotion. The smartest among us aren't immune. They're the most vulnerable, because they need to believe they're in control. Yet beneath the surface of this intellectual arms race lies something deeper, a quiet realization that intelligence, detached from integrity, becomes nothing more than performance, a show, a spectacle of reasoning with no anchor in truth. And that's where things take a turn. Because if intelligence itself has been weaponized, if logic has been co-opted by systems of manipulation, then the question isn't how we think, it's who we're thinking for. The frightening part isn't that you're being lied to, it's that your intelligence is being used to build the lie. And the next step, the part most people never see, is how this weaponized intelligence begins to shape not just society, but the human mind itself. Not through force, through design, through incentives, through comfort. That's when something more fundamental begins to erode. Because once intelligence starts serving power instead of truth, the mind begins to lose something far more important than knowledge. It starts to lose itself. The erosion of the self doesn't happen with a bang. It happens in feedback loops, in metrics, in systems where intelligence is rewarded not for depth, but for compliance disguised as creativity. A world where your thoughts echo well enough to trend, but never deeply enough to challenge anything fundamental. Because the deeper you go, the more disruptive you become. And disruption doesn't monetize. This is where the shape of your mind begins to shift. Not because someone's controlling it directly, but because the architecture around you subtly favors certain thoughts over others, certain tones, certain questions, certain types of intelligence. The philosopher Ivan Illich warned about institutionalized knowledge. He said that when learning becomes dependent on systems of certification, the ability to think becomes inseparable from the need to conform. You start shaping your curiosity around what's testable, gradable, promotable. You stop exploring what can't be measured. Over time, the system doesn't just shape your outputs, it reshapes your identity. Now extend that principle to the internet. Social platforms reward content that performs. But the content that performs isn't necessarily what's thoughtful, it's what's optimized. You're not sharing an idea. You're sharing a version of an idea that fits the rhythm of the feed, the bite-sized frame, the keyworded caption, the emotionally charged opening. And the more intelligent you are, the better you become at doing this well, without even realizing you're participating in it. You're not lying, you're just adapting. But adaptation comes with a cost. Every time you simplify a complex thought for mass appeal, you chip away at the nuance that made it worth thinking in the first place. And when you do this often enough, you stop noticing what's been lost. This is how intelligent people become useful without being dangerous. They aren't censored, they're celebrated. They're called thought leaders, influencers, changemakers. But what they lead, influence, or change never threatens the foundations. Because threatening the foundations would require saying things that don't land well. That require time, ambiguity, doubt, silence. And in today's world, silence is punished. You can't pause to think. You'll fall out of the algorithm, you'll lose momentum. So instead, you keep producing, quicker, louder, sharper, until you're no longer thinking to discover truth. You're thinking to maintain relevance. This is the final trap, when intelligence becomes self-preservation. Because by now, intelligence isn't about insight anymore. It's about survival. It's about maintaining position inside a system that only rewards you if you appear useful to it. If your knowledge reinforces what people already believe. If your reasoning affirms what people already feel. If your intellect makes power feel justified, not threatened. And here's where the danger compounds. Once intelligence is rewarded for protecting comfort, it stops being a tool for progress. It becomes a shield for stagnation. This happens in institutions, in media, in politics, in tech. But it also happens in people. People who once thought freely begin to moderate themselves, censor themselves, not out of fear, but out of success. Because the system does reward smart people, as long as they don't go too far, as long as they stay interesting, not dangerous. Socrates wasn't interesting, he was dangerous. That's why Athens killed him. Galileo wasn't interesting, he was dangerous. That's why the church silenced him. Malcolm X wasn't interesting, he was dangerous. That's why he was eliminated. The sad part is, these are the people, the innovators, we need the most. The ones not afraid to challenge the system for the sake of mankind. And yet, here we are. Dangerous thinkers don't disrupt because they're chaotic. They disrupt because they're independent. They think in ways the system can't predict, and therefore can't absorb. They don't argue within the frame. They question the frame itself. And that's the line most modern intelligence won't cross. Because to cross it is to risk exile. Most people, even smart ones, don't want exile. They want inclusion. Even if that inclusion means giving up something essential, like intellectual honesty. So what happens next? The culture begins to confuse agreement with accuracy, visibility with credibility, popularity with truth. And suddenly, intelligence becomes indistinguishable from propaganda. Not because it's malicious, but because it's efficient. That's how power works now. Not by silencing intelligence, but by exhausting it, distracting it, rewarding it for doing everything except thinking freely. At this point, it's easy to blame them, the platforms, the elites, the institutions, but that misses something more uncomfortable. Because the truth is, the most effective way to weaponize intelligence is to give people exactly what they want. Validation, recognition, safety, certainty. Smart people are still human. They still have egos. They still need belonging. And in an age where identity is wrapped around ideology, intelligence often becomes the tool we use to protect our identities, not examine them. You can see this in debates where both sides claim to be critically thinking, yet neither can tolerate a challenge. You see it in scientific communities that dismiss uncomfortable questions, not because they lack evidence, but because they violate norms. You see it in content creators who once explored fringe ideas, but now only echo the safest forms of rebellion. These aren't failures of intelligence. They're uses of it, to preserve image, reputation, and influence. And that's what makes this shift so hard to spot. It doesn't look like oppression. It looks like success, like progress, like maturity. But deep underneath, something is still missing. Because intelligence alone can't save us. Not if it's motivated by fear, or status, or safety. Real thinking, the kind that changes people and systems and civilizations, always starts with risk. The risk of being wrong. The risk of being misunderstood. The risk of losing something. That kind of thinking can't be weaponized easily, because it doesn't seek power, it seeks clarity. But clarity has no algorithm, it has no sponsor, no branded content strategy. It's quiet and slow and hard, and that's why almost no one wants to do it anymore. The world doesn't need more intelligent people. It needs people willing to be intelligent without being rewarded for it. Because right now, the very trait we once celebrated as a path to freedom is being used as a tool of conformity. And the more we pretend otherwise, the deeper the trap becomes. So ask yourself this. When you think, Who benefits? When you speak, what are you protecting? When you're praised, what are you being rewarded for? And if you stopped performing, would you still believe what you believe? That's where intelligence becomes something more than cleverness, more than argument, more than language. It becomes integrity. And that's the one thing no system can co-opt. Because you can fake intellect, but you can't fake courage. And without courage, intelligence is just theater.